Good afternoon, this is Lava Trail Canyon going up Black Mountain, and I'm going to break here to talk a little anime.
Lane, Serial Experiments.
A shame you seemed an honest man.
Remember that old parable about blind men trying to describe an elephant? Depending on which part they touched, they had radically different descriptions. Serial Experiments Lane is a bit like that. Lane is a cyberpunk sort of ghost story, or maybe it's a psychological mystery, or a treatise on religion, or perhaps a philosophical discourse on existentialism. Or maybe it's a load of elephant dung. One thing I am sure of, Lane is a 13-part anime series. The title character, Lane, appears to have been an early high school girl. She seems shy and withdrawn, and doesn't have very many friends at school. Her life and the life of her fellow students gets a little weird one day when one of her fellow classmates, Jii-san, deliberately throws herself off a building and kills herself. Now, as if a classmate's suicide isn't bad enough, some of the girls start getting posthumous emails from Jii-san. Now, Lane isn't very much into computers, but she makes a special effort to check her email that night on her Navi, and in what seems to be a live chat, Jii-san tells Lane that she isn't dead, she just gave up her physical body to enter the Wired, where she's found God. This exchange initiates a pretty drastic change in Lane, who suddenly takes a great interest in her Navi and the Wired. Soon she'll be piling up the hardware, doing mods with hacker chips, and water cooling her bedroom, all to better communicate with the Wired. Soon there's more weirdness. Lane will learn of a mysterious hacker group called the Knights. She'll spot a couple of odd men in black watching her from a black sedan parked in front of her house. And perhaps most unsettling, there will seem to be another Lane lookalike hanging around town and in the Wired, and at that most improbable place at all, a hip club for hackers called Siberia. This all begins very eerily, like a cyberpunk version of a supernatural horror story.
But I want you to know, Lane, that it is not a prank. This is real.
But why? Why did you die?
Here. There is a God.
Huh?
As the story moves along, Serial Experiments Lane will unleash a barrage of technical and philosophical concepts, from Vannevar Bush's Memex concept to Jung's collective unconsciousness and something called Schumann resonance. Writer Chiaki Kanaka tosses these ideas around into a big salad in much the same way Star Trek science officers modulate tachyons with the deflector array.
I guess that I'm confused again.
Serial Experiments Lane has pretty much no action. There are actually some people who get killed, but despite the blood, it's a pretty laid-back kind of murder. There's also no visual tripping around inside of cyberspace, and there's no mecha, magic, monsters, or fan service. There's talk in abundance, and a lot of scenes that have no dialogue at all, demanding that you simply pay attention to the screen. Serial Experiments Lane artfully builds a multi-layered mystery. Who is Lane, and what will she become? Is there a God in the Wired? Is existence nothing more than your memory? Do you need a body to be alive? Serial Experiments Lane will conclude, but it won't deliver any real explanations or answers to these questions, which isn't to say we don't learn some things as we go along, such as who those black suits are, or who the Knights are. Serial Experiments Lane is an animated Rorschach plot test that people can interpret however they want. It's the sort of series where you can get high around the campfire, stare up at the stars, and wonder if that mysterious Protocol 7 refers to Timothy Leary's genetic memory or the ISO reference model. Director Utaro Nakamura employed a unique art style for this series, using simple characters, solid colors, washed-out backgrounds, and oversaturated light and dark, pigmented shadows. He emphasizes the wires struck up on poles all over the town. Lane is always visually interesting. The sound design is equally unusual, where most series try to keep suspense with tense music and enhance drama with a building crescendo. Serial Experiments Lane is comfortable with silence, or the hum of an electric transformer, or the soft burble of inaudible voices in a crowd in the background, or just the tapping of a keyboard or stylus. Other than the songs and the credits, there's very little background music in Serial Experiments Lane. When I just rewatched this, I was struck by how well Serial Experiments Lane has withstood the passage of time. It was made just over a decade ago when Amazon.com only sold books, text messaging was a novelty, YouTube was unimaginable, and there were no social networks beyond message boards and news groups. Despite the story's close identification to these sorts of networking technologies, it hasn't really become an anachronism. If anything, we live more in what Lane calls the wired today than then. I usually prefer stories that have more of a conclusion than Serial Experiment Lane offers. I first watched it back when it was first released on Laserdisc, one pair of episodes at a time as they were released, and back then I was expecting the show to have more of an ending when they got to the final volume. Just because something is inscrutable doesn't necessarily make it profound. But Lane offers an intriguing ride, even if it is a ride mostly to nowhere. So I give Serial Experiments Lane 4 stars for raising some interesting concepts. If you enjoy a good existential tease and require neither action nor answers, you might enjoy entering the Wired. Serial Experiments Lane was released in North America by Pioneer Genian, and it's now out of print. Those DVDs were pretty minimalist, with just a few character design sketches as extras.
Thanks for listening. And by the way, if you're